Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Raquel. That was lovely. That was an awesome just intro. Joel, thank you for all the amazing work that you've done with Creative Mornings. I went to a few Creative Mornings and they were all just, yeah, they were wonderful. And I really appreciate the community that has been created here. And I know that there's a lot of regulars and, I just appreciate, you inviting me to be a part of this. And I'm also really glad that it's continued to this virtual environment. And I think that that's also a show of kind of resilience in this kind of space, creating these virtual communities. Okay, I think I'm going to get started and share my screen. I think before we do that, if you want to join me, I'm going to take a deep breath, and I was thinking we could all just collectively do that together. You all are probably not as nervous as me, but okay. So let's just exhale and inhale. Awesome. All right, thanks. Okay, so share screen. All right. Okay, does that work? Okay, cool. All right, so radical. So first of all, this is me as a little art nugget, and I didn't really necessarily need to put it in, but I felt like, come on, kind of had to include it. Okay, so the word radical. This word comes from the Latin word radic or radix, which means root. And art has always been at the root of my journey, and it has really guided me since I can remember. And artists have been on the forefront of what has been considered radical since the dawn of time. All major art movements that shaped our history, Impressionism, starting Cubism, Surrealism, pop art, modern art, were pivotal because they allowed people to see the world around them and see themselves in a new way. I believe that art continues to do that today. We face unprecedented times right now. I don't think I need to remind people of that. But it's a moment we must reimagine our current systems, deeply listen to those who have been sidelined, and work together to create something new. It's a time for healing, and it's a time for art. As I look back now at my journey thus far in DC as an artist, I see 5 key elements that I believe foster and sustain radical creative expression: community, collaboration, cultural power, collective space, and connection. Yes, I'm very excited that they all start with C. Okay, let's get into it. So community. This is a piece I did a few years ago, and I included this quote by Audre Lorde, who's an inspiration, hopefully to all of us, certainly to me. Without community, there is no liberation. And I think that, we really need each other to survive and to thrive. I didn't realize how important this was until I moved back home to DC after college. Building and sustaining community here became something I really love to do. So sort of by coincidence, I ended up in this shared studio space called Union Arts. And there was about 30 artists that were working in that space. And I realized soon after being there that a lot of the artists didn't know each other. And, selfishly, I wanted to meet all the artists, and I thought it would be great for all the artists to meet each other. So I organized this open studio, one of 3 that we had in the space. And some of these artists had been working in there for 30 years, and they had never met artists on other floors. So it was a really beautiful time for these artists to kind of come together. And I think a lot of sort of unity and power was created in the time that we could connect. And on the left, we were all kicked out of the building and at a certain point, and, it was really sad. And so I created this portrait project where, again, I could kind of individually connect with all these artists and photograph them in their space. So 2B Studios was specifically where I was on the 2nd floor, and it was a real time for learning for me. It was the first time that I was part of a collective of artists that were radical artists. They were kind of social justice oriented artists, and I really learned specifically how art amplifies messaging for movements and how to make the movement look good. So there was artists and collectives that would come from all over the country And we'd print, hundreds of screen print flags or build different structures for direct actions. And I learned a ton also about, my whiteness and showing up in spaces that I had never really existed in before. This was one event that we had, Incarcerated Masses, and um, it was a really amazing show and one of really many that we had in this space. So the following year, I had my first solo show at the Fridge Gallery in DC. And Alex, who runs the Fridge, really went out on a limb because I didn't have, I had never really shown properly before. And he really, he gave me this space and this opportunity. And I didn't want to disappoint. And this was really, the show was about me, but I wanted to be much more than that. And the whole show, Women in Color, was sort of celebrating all the women in my life that had kind of helped me my career up until that point. And I love the idea of kind of portraiture and celebrating, unsung heroes or just, regular folks. So I did portraits of a lot of the women in my life. And I also wanted it to be a party. I really kind of wanted to get away from the idea of like a boring opening. So we had DJs and a live band and a performance art piece. And a lot of these artists actually had never met or worked together. And there was some really meaningful collaborations that happened after this. And above all, the show really solidified my love for the DC art community. And I was, I think before, but this really was the moment that committed me to sticking around here in DC and doing what I could do to foster its growth and sustainability. Collaboration. So of course, community and collaboration are close, they're quite connected. When I've experienced successful collaboration, I think ideas are shared without fear, and there's an environment of non-judgment. There's an understanding we are committed to a shared goal, and by truly seeing each other and amplifying what each person brings to the table, we can create a new, even better thing that neither person could have done as well alone. So this is Kate. Kate is a powerhouse artist. Sadly, she lives back in Oakland now. But she has more than a decade of experience on me of making art and specifically working in communities and working on anti-racism initiatives. And I just learned a tremendous amount from her. And we met and it was like, wow, you like to wheat paste in the streets too? Cool, let's hang out. And we just immediately started to collaborate. So other than kind of funny little small projects here and there, we started to apply for grants to paint murals together. And I really learned from Kate kind of how to work authentically with these communities to represent their imagery and amplify their messaging. And, what does it really look like to chat with these folks and build trust and then create a piece of art that they really felt happy and excited about and that represented them and their story. So we created a variety of murals together. This one is probably one of my faves. It is on Right Proper Brewing Company next to Howard Theater. And they wanted us to make a mural of Duke Ellington. But once we sort of peeled back some of the layers of kind of the DC jazz community, we really realized that, of course, Duke is amazing, but there's a lot of sculptures and murals of Duke around. And, we wanted to look at what was the legacy of the DC jazz community after Duke left when he was 18. And, of course, it's incredible and vibrant. So we talked to a variety of DC jazz musicians and ended up kind of expanding and opening it up and celebrating a lot of jazz musicians on the wall. Also, this was, Kate and I had to figure out a way to paint these portraits on the wall that was a very difficult brick. So we ended up painting them on these panels and then kind of creating a puzzle. And it was, I'm not going to get into the details of how ridiculous it was to attach these panels to the wall, but it was a real time that we needed to work together. This was just a fun kind of project that we did at Stanton Elementary School, kind of just a community day of painting. And I wanted to include it because I thought it was a perfect example of how kind of, we painted on this just like wheelchair ramp was really kind of the space that they had available. And it was a real opportunity for us to, use art and color and vibrancy to change the landscape and also celebrate folks from the community that had been there for generations. And it was also a time that the community could kind of come out and be a part of the process. And I think that that's really important, that there's ownership over what's actually made, not only content, but the creation of it as well. Kate and I did a variety of fun little street art type things. And, I love my public art, my public sanctioned work, but also unsanctioned work I think is really fun too. So this was Feminist Fuck with Facts, just a little wheat paste. And, this was kind of around Me Too, and there was just a lot of misinformation and there was a lot of misinformation going on specifically about women. So we kind of created these images, and they had each one had a fact, and then it had where it was cited, and then an action point. And then we created the symbol of the United States of Inequity, and we pasted them all around the town. And I think what's great about this is that it's really the power of reclaiming that outdoor space, that's full of ads or, any number of things, shops, buildings, et cetera. And kind of what does it mean to reclaim some of that space with meaningful knowledge like this? Drop in some facts. So on Inauguration Day 2017, I flew to Karachi to do a public art project there. And I collaborated with some American artists and then some Pakistani artists as well. And we went to different schools and did workshops there. We also painted a series of murals. And these students, they really opened up when they shared their work. And it was a way for us, coming from such different places, to really connect. On the left here is a mural of a father and son who are part of 27 generations of Qawwali music singers. And I actually had no idea what I was going to paint. We didn't have a lot of time to decide, but they had a performance, and I was just blown away by their music. And then I found out that they were father and son, part of 27 generations. And I asked them, can I paint you? And they were really excited about it. And I photographed them and created this piece. And it was just a really meaningful experience. Next. Okay. So I would say I didn't really think or use the words radical collaboration until I had to make 40 art objects in 12 days with a team of artists that had never worked together. And, this could have been a disaster, right? But it was really the opposite. And I think it was partly because of some magic stardust in the air, and partly because we had a corner of like stones and essential oils. But I think it was also because we trusted each other. We worked incredibly hard. We had shared values and a shared vision, and we really got the work done. And we really thought, again, about how we could sort of push beyond the banner and make more protest art objects. So we created some of these cutouts, and we liked this idea partly because there was a bunch of different words inside of them, and they could be held up and you could see the crowd through them. So it was sort of, the crowd became a part of the art piece. This was the front of the march. Of course, we had to have some banners. So this is just a really quick video by Nasreen, who runs All Media Storytelling, and she did all the video and media for us. And she actually created a full-length film about the Women's March this year, and specifically kind of about the art. And it's traveled all over the place in film festivals and has done really well. Highly recommend checking it out. And this is specifically just she did little kind of bits on all of us. And this highlights Amir, who's an amazing textile artist based in Baltimore, who came down to help us out. And, one idea we had was to create these capes because the theme was women's wave. So here's Amir talking a little bit about the capes.
I think as a Black with feminine experience navigating through the world, I have a very specific voice. I think a lot of my art in the past has been about feminine empowerment, been about the concept of the divine feminine. What I specifically tried to do through the capes is physically create a manifestation of the wave. And the wave conceptually to me is an extremely powerful movement of just women and femmes rolling through and washing up all the bad things that have happened in the past.
What does it look like when my
great granddaughter or grandchildren can exist in a world that they feel like they can be themselves and feel safe. A place where women can speak up for the environment, speak out for other injustices on a level in which they are heard at the same level as men. That's a really powerful thing, and I don't think it's too much to ask. Yay, it's not too much to ask. Cool.
I think as
Okay, so I was somehow roped into doing Women's March again one last time this year in 2020. Can you believe that this was January 2020? Because I can't. It feels like it was 1,000 years ago, all packed together here. And, we had a much smaller team and a much smaller budget, but we still collaborated on ways that we could kind of, again, amplify this message and sort of continue to create these kind of more of an experience. So we created beautiful puppets, and we created just a variety of very cool art objects. One thing that I thought was really special is, or was these community days that we had leading up to the actual march. And honestly, I think that these are more important and often more meaningful than even the day of the march. It's a time where these folks can connect over something like painting a banner. They meet each other, have conversations. And a lot of these folks, they say, I'm not an artist, but really they are, and they can contribute. And I think that's really important. And also, I think this is really where community is built. I was invited out to Colorado State to lead a week-long project called Social Justice Through the Arts with a group of high school students from all over Colorado. And this was a wonderful experience for me. And I really believe it was radical collaboration. These students had never met each other before, and they came together, and within 1 week, they had they attended some dance classes and movement, and they had done a lot of like really deep talking. And a lot of these students came from really challenging backgrounds and had very difficult lives. And I think it was really a time for them to really express themselves and be vulnerable with each other, and then create a piece of art where they could, say, this is how I want to be represented in this piece. And this is how I kind of want this to flow and want this to look. And with all these sketches, we kind of pulled it all together, and within 3 days painted this mural. And they felt so much ownership over it, and they were so proud. And it was called Through Line, and this red line kind of connected all of their different stories together. And it was honestly really beautiful. Cultural power. So what is cultural power? So as Raquel mentioned before, Fabiana Rodriguez is a mentor of mine, and she's just an inspiration and has been for a very long time. And she started an organization called Culture Strike, which is now the Center for Cultural Power. And she's really been kind of the one that has coined this term, cultural power. And she says, quote, our stories and our cultural expressions shape societies and its policies and influence our own conceptions of ourselves and the world around us. Culture is power. We are the creators of our culture. And when I think about that, I think of the way artists use symbols to simplify and amplify messaging, allowing it to cross borders and language barriers. So for example, this is a piece that I painted in Colorado, different time I was in Colorado. And I never painted a political piece, first of all, outside of DC. And so I didn't really know how people would kind of deal with this piece. But I used these sort of symbols of the monarch butterfly, which is a symbol of migration, and Linda Sarsour, who really represents kind of this powerful activist and incredible message. And it was a way for me to kind of connect with folks that had questions about this. And it was a way in, really, these kind of symbols. And I think that's really powerful. This is the first public art piece, the first mural that I painted in DC, actually. And this was on the next to the Mitch Snyder homeless shelter, which is one of the biggest homeless shelters on the East Coast. And they said you could paint whatever you wanted, but I'd been working with Kate and working with this radical collective at 2B Studios, and I really thought, what would be meaningful for this space? What am I doing with this opportunity? And so I connected with the folks at the shelter, and I also wanted to really amplify the message of Mitch Snyder because he has such a powerful story. So I illustrated them, and then kind of along the bottom, there's almost this kind of like nod to Keith Haring style, and kind of this protest scene, and saying that homeless lives matter. And I think that, amplifying the story of this community, which is so often literally just overlooked, across the country, but I think especially in Washington. And this is just mere blocks from the Capitol. And it's also on the on ramp to 395. So thousands of people see this. And I think that that's awesome. So as I'm kind of painting, painting and painting and painting, I'm realizing, it's important to leverage a variety of platforms and mediums. And so I'm really starting to practice and hone in my skills of my digital media. So I got an Instagram and really started to realize, the power that those platforms had and kind of the viral nature that can happen with this type of art. And what I sort of saw and understood was that, and Fabiana also sort of talks about this, is that politics moves slow and culture moves fast. And we know that culture today is overwhelmingly dominated by white men. And I think that that is shifting, we know, but it's, that's still overwhelmingly the case. And this leadership is making the decisions that don't reflect the reality of the country at large. So the question is, as artists, as creatives, how do we change that? And I really believe that the more creatives of every medium, storytellers, poets, dancers, writers, visual artists, make platforms and spaces perhaps otherwise closed to them to create and contribute to the cultural landscape, we'll have more of a true reflection of the lives and experiences of people in this country today. And I think with that cultural change will come political shifts. And we know that that happens. These are just a few other digital pieces. This one on the left was a special project I did with People's Paper Co-op, which is a wonderful organization of formerly incarcerated women that use art to fundraise and amplify their message. And so this was a fundraiser for them, and it was awesome to work directly with them on this. And on the right, this is just a fun project that I did with National Women's Law Center actually earlier this year, because apparently we're still fighting for access to birth control, which makes literally no sense to me at all. This was a piece that I made after I just listened kind of on a whim to this speech by Reverend William Barber, who runs the Poor People's Campaign and worked closely with Martin Luther King. And he said to this a lot throughout, too many people are comfortable with other people's death. And I just sort of jotted it down, and it really just stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I just wanted to create this piece of art and put it out in the world. And it just went viral. And, I think, for reasons pretty clear, I think people really connected with this at this time. So space. This is a view of the inside of Tubi Studios and all of its glory and insane mess. And I just want to kind of harken back to this space, because this space was the first time that I could really meet other artists and have them meet me, and really see the power of like curating events and stuff like that. And it really made me think, what if one day I had my own space? What would it look like to create a space that supported artists to create without judgment, apology, or the need to attach a dollar amount onto their expression? This is something I wanted as an artist, and I thought other DC creatives might want as well. And that finally happened. Yay, a few years later, this beautiful strip mall offered this awesome space in this former H&R block. And I got to rent this space for a year. And it was wonderful. So the space was, it was, first of all, it was very cheap, and it was very big. And I didn't need the whole space myself. So I thought I'd take kind of the back third and make the front 2/3 kind of a community art space. This was one of the first little events we had there, bringing my friend Danny into the space, who's just a wonderful healer and meditation yoga person. And I also kind of wanted to bring the right energy vibes into the space. So we started to have more events in the space. We say we, but it was really just me. And a variety of things, different yoga classes. We hosted art builds kind of before a lot of the big protests that were happening in DC. And my favorite thing that happened there was these artist showcases. I loved this. I invited artists that were emerging in DC as for an opportunity to show in the space. And who knew that an old H&R Block would actually be a great gallery? It had beautiful long walls, no windows, tall ceilings. It was awesome. Thanks, H&R Block. And I showed over 25 artists during that time. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this was that when I moved back to DC, there was a variety of these very cool DIY spaces. And it was an awesome opportunity for me as an emerging artist to kind of have that in-between experience of like, I have a few pieces, but I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't really know how to show, to kind of leverage those spaces. But they had all since closed. So I wanted to offer that to other emerging artists in DC and give them the opportunity to hang their work, promote themselves, build their portfolio, and continue to sustain and foster this amazing art scene in Washington. So then, 12 months is up and we have this final event. And, in Stu fashion, it was just a blowout party. And we had performers and art, and it was just really special. So when everything had been cleared out of the space, I didn't want to just leave. I wanted to do something to sort of commemorate the time, because this was a transformational year for me. And it was that way because of this space. And so I decided to invite a group of artists that had been a part of kind of the Stu community back into the space and sort of ceremonially destroy the space, because it was going to be knocked down anyways to build all these condos. So we wanted to kind of do some of that ourselves. And so I had each artist sort of express themselves in whatever way they wanted, whether it was dance or music or a poem, and then or painting on the walls themselves, whatever. And then we sat down in a circle and really talked about DC art spaces and why it's so important to have those, and what does that really mean. So this is just a very short clip, and Nick Bringle, who is an amazing filmmaker in DC, did a 9 or 10-minute piece that I posted on my website, and I highly recommend you checking it out with actual words. Yay, good times. So I floated around for a little while, sadly, without space, until I found a few years later, Stu 2.0. Yay. So this space, totally different part of town, much smaller, more expensive, different vibes, no big parties. But, I wanted to carry a lot of the intention that I had in that first space into this space. And one of the reasons I liked this space was that there's this funny sort of garage in the front, and the landlord said, yeah, you can do whatever you want. You can paint it. So I painted it a variety of different times. And then a few days after George Floyd was murdered, I painted this, and I talked to the community. It's a very diverse community where my space is, and kind of asked what what they would want to see and how they would want, these images to be represented. And so this is what's on the space now. So I started to have just a few events in the space. I built out one wall, so it's just the wall gallery, and we've only had one show at the wall gallery. Ebony Marshman showed there, and it was a really wonderful show. I had loved her work forever, and I just pegged as soon as I got a new space and a wall to show. I wanted to show her work. And then the very last event that we had with people was Art and Dialogue, an evening of collage and conversation about race, justice, and the future of the women's movement, March 10th, right on the cusp there, until I had to close the space. But before that, I was using the space to really teach. And I taught to, pay for the space. And I used to teach middle and high school art. And I really love teaching, actually. And I love teaching adults. And one of the reasons I love teaching adults here in DC is that, I think that there's a lot of folks that, maybe they don't tap into their own creative energy as much as they want to. And so I love getting the feedback of, this is so relaxing. I didn't know that I needed this. I never knew that I could make art like this. This is awesome. So, that kind of feeds you as a teacher and as an artist. And it was something I really loved to do and will hope to continue to do when the space opens back up. It was also big enough for me to build out things like RBG, which was the first kind of sculptural, the second sculptural mural that I had done, but something I was really glad I had space to create. And here she is, out bathed in light, as she should be. So collective virtual space, that's kind of where we are now. I've started to do a few virtual events. I did a really special one with Halim Flowers, an amazing DC artist, about revolutionary love, which is a topic I'm really interested in, kind of about how love can transcend and just how amazing and powerful it is when we can really connect with each other on the level of love. And he was incarcerated for 22 years, and he talks a lot about revolutionary love. So I wanted to have a conversation with him about what that really meant to him. And then I had a conversation with a vegan friend of mine about how we could reduce meat in our diet and help save the planet just a little bit. So the last thing is connection. And connection is really at the heart of what I'm saying here. And I found what feeds me most beyond the mere act of making art is sharing that art and the connections made throughout that process. This is one of many monoprints that I made recently. So since the shutdown, I've been spending a tremendous amount of time in nature, specifically in Rock Creek Park, but kind of camping in the Shenandoah, taking walks with a close friend or my mom, or alone, and connecting with the earth and with myself. And I really find this to be deeply healing. And I find I can't make the work I want to if I feel out of balance, if I feel disconnected. And on the other side of that, when I feel like I'm a rose that has been watered, I feel full and I feel like I can create endlessly without boundary or limits. These are etchings that I made in a fellowship that I'm doing at Pyramid Atlantic. I'd never etched before. These are pretty large, and I really love the process. And it's also a non-toxic etching process. And I'm interested in moving more into ways as artists that we can kind of, create less of an impact on the planet with our art, because there's actually a lot of art techniques that are very toxic. So this is a process that I am really enjoying exploring right now. And for years, I actually carried a lot of guilt when I made art that wasn't overtly political. Coming from kind of this collective of artists, it really felt like when I made art that didn't have to do with something that had a really clear message about any number of social justice topics, that I was really just kind of, another white person that was making art, and it was really frivolous and unnecessary. And I really sat with that and chewed on it for a really long time. And I think that, how could I say my art is radical if it's like a portrait of a flower? But as I grew and continued to make my work, I realized for me, creating work was a meditation, and it was healing, and it's joy, and it's hope, and it's escape, and it's release. And now I really overstand. I have a friend that just started using overstand, not understand. I overstand that creative expression itself is a radical act. So I've just been cranking out art since the pandemic. The very beginning of the pandemic, I just, part of me kind of enjoyed being alone in my studio and not talking to anyone day after day and just kind of experimenting. And I found what I wanted was joyful art, playful color, fun things. I wonder why. I was also like learning a lot about mushrooms at the time and was really inspired by kind of the connection, the mycelium roots, and just a lot of the things that, mushrooms are awesome. I think we can learn so much from nature and its resilience and beauty. So I'm very inspired by natural elements. These are some mono prints that I made, again, back at Pyramid Atlantic when they opened back up. And again, just kind of playing with color and form and joy and shapes. Um, and, at the stew, as I kind of continue to reflect back, I think of times like at the stew when we had a group of Venezuelan singers come as part of an event to spread awareness about the crisis facing the area. And by the end of their song, there was probably 50 or 60 people there. Everybody was in song. And another time I had a student come up after a presentation about art that I did at Colorado State. And she said she'd never been supported by her family to make art and said she was kind of discouraged. And she'd always wanted to kind of make clothes and design. And she was actually leaving class to go to the fabric store and get back into making art. She was so inspired. And the teacher came up to me afterwards and she said, that student hasn't spoken the entire semester. I thought that was pretty powerful. I've really lost count of the folks that stop by while I'm painting a mural outside and we have a moment to chat. Maybe they share a story about their form of expression or their thoughts on my art. And one of the reasons I love painting outside is these connections that are made. And Kate and I often joke when we painted murals that, who really often stands in the same place, for 8 hours a day on some random street corner in the same place. You really see kind of who comes and goes. You learn a lot about that neighborhood. And I love that aspect of mural making. So to kind of tie it all together, connection is needed to build community, which allows for collaboration. When folks are given the tools to express themselves, they can unleash their cultural power. The container where this beauty happens is the collective space. And I want to underscore one thing as I end here, and that is, if you don't already know or you need reminding, anyone listening here, you are creative. You are an artist. I hope you leave inspired to pick up a brush or write a poem or take a walk and maybe pick up leaves of different colors and arrange them in a pattern that shows you something new. We have challenges today that need radical solutions. This is an all hands on deck situation we find ourselves in. It's time to access your inner radical creativity. I invite you to find connection with yourself, with each other, and let's work to imagine a future that we know is possible. Thank you.